Okay? All right, let's keep going. Now we're going to keep talking about these heuristics. So now we're going to talk about availability. So the availability heuristic is, in this case, it's a bias. So let's talk about, it leads to bias. So what's a heuristic, first off? A heuristic is something like a shortcut or a rule of thumb. So if, for example, you were looking out in the visual world and you see certain things are blurrier and certain things are crisper and clearer, you might use the visual heuristic that things that are blurrier are farther away from you than things that are crisper and clearer, right? That's a shortcut. It might not be true, right? But it's a reliable indicator of distance in the visual field, is how blurry things are. If things are really blurry, then they're farther away than things being really clear. So I can see Jacob very clearly, but I can barely see
You already said it.
Jacob, the other Jacob. I can barely see the other Jacob. You know, I can sort of, let's see. Yeah, okay, there I can see him more clearly, right? Okay, so the distance is indicated by this heuristic. The heuristic is blurriness. We have heuristics in cognition also. So let's look at this experiment. So the classic case. You're given a list of names consisting of men and women, men's names and women's names. And the names vary in degrees of famousness, of fame, right? Subjects are asked whether they heard more male or female names after hearing the list. So in some lists, the men were relatively more famous than the women, and in other, the women were relatively more famous than the men. In each case, the people hearing the lists judged the lists with the more famous men to have more men in it. There are equal numbers of men and women. Similarly, in lists with the more famous women in it, the subjects judged the list to contain more women than men. So if they hear more famous women's names in the list, then they think there are more women in the list. So this is a heuristic called availability. So it's the idea of how available the information is to you, or how available the answer is to you. So more famous names are more cognitively available in some sense to you. You remember them more easily than names that aren't famous. Simple as that. And that's a rule of thumb. It's a heuristic. Okay, and so what's going to happen is, in that case, your judgment of the numbers of men versus women's names will be overridden by the fame in the names of the women or the men, respectively, right? Does that make sense? Simple as that. That's the availability heuristic. We'll read. You can read more about this going forward in the text. The reason that availability plays into our decision making is because of this phenomenon of anecdote. So anecdotes are stories we tell each other, right? So think about, I don't want you to read the anecdotes yet. Think about the stories we tell each other about experiences. They usually have elements that are emotionally compelling or that are particularly salient to us in various ways. Let's look at some of them. So my uncle was robbed when he visited Costa Rica. That's an anecdote. Anecdote is a story. In this case, it's a story about a single event. My uncle got robbed when he visited Costa Rica. When would you hear someone say, my uncle got robbed when he visited Costa Rica? In what context would that arise?
Someone was thinking about going to Costa Rica?
I'm thinking about going to Costa Rica. Anecdote pops up. Costa Rica, my uncle, he got robbed in Costa Rica. Okay? And what is the conversational role of the anecdote? So let's say AJ is thinking about going to Costa Rica. Jacob says, my uncle got robbed when he went to Costa Rica. Why does Jacob say that?
convince him not to go to Costa Rica.
Perhaps to convince him not to go to Costa Rica, right?
Tell him the risks.
Right? Because Costa Rica is, according to this anecdote, or the person uttering the anecdote, Costa Rica is dangerous. My uncle got robbed when he went to Costa Rica. Now, do people get robbed in Costa Rica? I presume they must. Yes? Do people get robbed in Lawrence, Kansas? Yes. Okay. So people get robbed places. That's true. Yeah? Your uncle also had lunch in Costa Rica? But you wouldn't say, my uncle had lunch in Costa Rica, right? Why not? You're more likely to have lunch in Costa Rica than in Lawrence? It's irrelevant, right, from the perspective of the kind of this conversation, but is it meaningful for AJ's decision? Is the fact that your uncle got robbed in Costa Rica relevant to AJ's decision as to where he should go on vacation? Costa Rica is very safe, actually, right? But is it relevant, in fact? No, it's probably completely irrelevant that one person got robbed in Costa Rica and that you happen to know him, right? Now, where does availability play in? Well, first off, he's your uncle, right? So it's prominent in your memory. Robbery is emotionally compelling, right? So that's available in your memory. Yeah? Okay? So the availability part of this is that you have this awesome story about your uncle, and he's your uncle. Now, but notice, in terms of the evidential value of this, let's say there was one robbery in Costa Rica, but he was trying to decide between going to Costa Rica and going to Guatemala. In Guatemala, let's say there were thousands and thousands of robberies. Yes? In Costa Rica, there was one robbery, and it happened to be your uncle. Right? Now, he's trying to decide, should I go to Costa Rica or should I go to Guatemala? You say, my uncle got robbed in Costa Rica. Your anecdote is irrelevant. In fact, it's misleading. Yeah? Okay? Because if he has to decide between if he's worried about his safety, if he's deciding between Guatemala and Costa Rica, clearly the fact that one person was robbed in Costa Rica is evidence that he should go to Costa Rica over Guatemala. Does that make sense? Okay? So this is the n equals 1 problem. N equals 1 in terms of evidence, that's not evidence. Right? Now, if you were to say, hold on just 1 second, Joshua. If you were to say your chances of getting robbed in Costa Rica statistically are higher than your chances of getting robbed in Guatemala, is that good evidence? Yes, that is good evidence. Okay, let's keep talking about this. Josh?
I'm confused. What is this? What is this exactly?
Okay, so each of these are individual stories. They're called anecdotes. And anecdotal evidence is extremely powerful in our decision making, but it's extremely biasing because it's not good evidence. By definition, anecdotal evidence is not good evidence. It's not evidence at all. It's minimal evidence, okay? So let's look at the next one. Gertrude had a bad cold, but after she ran 5 miles, it went away. What conclusion can we draw from that? Nothing. No conclusion. That is not evidence. Let's look at this. Cass ate 3 pounds of apples a day for a year, and his cancer disappeared. So can you. Go ahead.
Where's the facts?
Well, the facts are there, right? So your uncle did get robbed in Costa Rica, right? Ashari's asking, like, where's the factual basis, or where are the facts in this? The facts are there. They're just one fact, right? It's just one fact we're talking about, that this guy ate 3 pounds of apples a day for a year, and his cancer disappeared. So can you. So why is that not good evidence? Someone other than AJ and Jacob. How about someone back in the back corner there? Why is it not good evidence? How about the man there with the yeah? You don't know? Interesting. Okay. So do you think it is good evidence? If you had cancer, would you eat 3 apples a day or 3 pounds of apples a day? That guy did, and his cancer went away. Yeah? Would you do that too?
I don't really see the correlation between the apples and having cancer disappear.
Okay, that's good. Well, there is a correlation in this one case, right? So his eating those apples, all those apples, pounds and pounds of apples, his eating all those apples is correlated with, in his case, right, his cancer disappearing. So there is a correlation. So correlation, let's see if I can remember your name. Muriel.
Correlation does not equate to causation.
Well, that's true, that's true, that's true. But if you had lots and lots of correlations, then you might think there might be some causal story here, right?
If you only have one example to base the fact on, then it's not really.
Very good, very good. But notice how influential these things are in our own decision making. Right? When friends and family tell us about things that worked for them, it tends to be, tends to make you think, oh, maybe I should do that also, right? Yeah? It's very hard not to feel that way. Like if your uncle says something to you, if your mom says something to you, she says, you should take cod liver oil because I take cod liver oil and I haven't gotten sick in 6 months. Yeah, it's your mom talking. You got to pay attention to your mom, right? Bless you. Jessica had really bad luck with identity theft until she uninstalled all the apps on her phone. Again, n equals 1, right? There's only one datum here. There's only one piece of evidence, and that's not much. So each of these anecdotes are supposed to be giving you reasons to believe something, but none of them do what they're supposed to do. Let's do this one, and then we're going to do an in-class exercise.